Time now to take a look at the morning's newspapers. Here with me to review them are the journalist and author Gemma Forte and the broadcaster and writer Edward Adu. A very good morning to both of you. Nice to see you both.
Good morning.
Morning. One story in town, and it's a pretty serious one, a worrying one for pretty much everyone, really. All the front pages going with this is the rise, of course, in the energy price cap. So, Gemma, let's take a look, first of all, shall we, at the Mirror's front page. A dramatic message to the leaders of the country from the Mirror.
It is dramatic, and I also think it's appropriate. It sort of mirrors and reflects really how people like Martin Lewis are feeling, absolutely pleading with action immediately. There does seem to be this horrible sense of inertia. Obviously, everybody understands there's a leadership contest underway, but Parliament could have been recalled. It was recalled when Afghanistan fell, for instance. Last summer it was called when the Duke of Edinburgh died. And this feels enormous for everybody. As you say, it's dominating the front pages, but it's also dominating conversation everywhere you go. I was on another job yesterday somewhere, and everybody was talking about their businesses, about what they're going to do with their bills, their mortgages going up. So we know that there will be some action eventually, but it feels like a long time coming.
Well, yes, and what do you make of this, Edward? Because the government might say we have to go through the process of a leadership contest to make sure that it's there's proper scrutiny of the next Prime Minister. It's a very big job after all. And what's the point of the current government putting in plans which may be unpicked in a few weeks' time?
I think the concerns for many people is what happens beyond October. I think there was a report earlier in the week on Sky News talking about churches who it may have been Sky News, maybe someone else, but as another outlet, but they were talking about churches opting to possibly rejig their plans on funerals because of the cost, because they simply have predicted the cost, and they said, look, we can't afford to keep the heating, keep the electricity going just for a single funeral. So it comes to that extent where even churches are having to rethink their plans. And when it comes to the actual to the strategy of the government, and obviously the current government, we're not sure who's going to be the next Prime Minister. But I mean, contingency plans, I think that the shared view for many who I've spoken to, there needs to be some contingency plans put in place so that at least people know, because we're all going to be affected by this. And I think that it's about clarity. Obviously, we've been the actual the cost of being predicted. We know what we're expected to pay in October, but I think it's down to people like, for example, single parents, charities. I'm hearing not just on the radio, but generally, not just beyond churches, harrowing stories of charities who, for example, a charity in High Wycombe where their average bill is around £8,000, and it's going to be increased to £35,000. Now, without any help or any form of subsidy, how are those charities likely to survive? And I think that's the main concern. If charities can't survive, then the vulnerable and those who are in need are going to suffer.
Well, that's right. And if we look at the front of the Guardian, Gemma, as well, lives will be lost, they say. I mean, it's not just people worrying about paying their bills, digging into their savings, or losing their jobs, keeping the lights on, being able to eat. They're talking about this having a major impact on people's health potentially.
It's an absolute catastrophe, as you say, and there will be people already that this will be impacting their mental health. They're thinking, how am I going to cope? How am I going to be able to feed my children? Looking at these meters going up, it's extraordinary. Then that has a knock-on effect with all our public services, which are absolutely not coping as it is. And I feel so sorry, for instance, for health workers. I mean, what are they going to be facing this winter? And then can hospitals pay their heating bills? I mean, this is absolutely enormous, and I think communication is so important. And whether we have a leader decided or not, if you're going to be a future leader, you need to start speaking like one. And somebody asked Truss at one of the hustings, what's your plan? And it was like, oh, there's no plan today. That does not help. That kind of language does not feed into what the public are feeding. It has to be, I've got a fully formed plan, it's coming to you soon. Labour are in opposition, they've got one, so it isn't good enough, I'm afraid, and it feels indulgent also to be just sort of focusing on these hustings. It does, it's too big. And there must be a way for the powers that be to come together to tackle this ASAP before people do lose their lives. Because unfortunately, that is going to happen.
Well, yes, and the quote that they have on the front of The Guardian is from Martin Lewis, the consumer champion that you referenced there. He's the one that said lives will be lost this winter. Let's move on to the Daily Telegraph and their take. Edward, if that's okay. Middle class need energy bills help, says Zahawi. Now, this is one of the things he said in an interview with the Daily Telegraph, isn't it? He's basically saying it's not just the poorest we need to be concerned about. People on middle incomes will also be hit pretty hard.
I think we're referring to what Gemma was saying, where there needs to be a plan in place, and mentioning Liz Truss there, and you read the article, you see the top line of the headline by Zahawi, and it makes you think straight away. In a sense, it's the indication where some people have already been left behind, where help is only going to be provided for a certain few. And it shouldn't really be for the middle class. It's got to be, the plans should be in place for everybody. And whilst Gemma was talking there, it just made me think, when it comes down to when we're in the crux of this in a couple of months' time, you've got to think no one's mentioned the NHS and how the NHS may struggle, because if you can't put your heating on, for many people who have respiratory type conditions, I often used to get chest infections in winter if there was no warmth. So the thing is, if I decide not to put my heating on, then suddenly I will get an infection. There's going to be various people out there who are going to be in the same predicament. And that's the problem. And it's going to overburden the NHS. So it's not just about looking after the middle class. They need to reach out, and they need to to reach out and say, look, we need to put plans in place for the NHS, because in a couple of months' time, and I've spoken to many people who say, listen, we've been talking about the extent of what COVID has done to the NHS. This could be another issue.
And Gemma, obviously a lot of focus on Liz Truss and her plans. I mean, both leadership candidates, obviously, but according to the poll, she's the front runner, probably the most likely candidate to be our next Prime Minister. The Eye focusing on how her tack seems to have changed a little bit on her approach to this.
Well, that's right. For a long time, she was really focused on tax cuts and talking about how that would turn into growth. That now seems like fantasy. And so hopefully that message is getting through, because she is changing the language. I don't think anybody likes the word handout particularly. These are very, very unusual times. Unfortunately, this comes in the same week where she was overheard telling people that she doesn't think British people work hard, that she thinks we all need to graft more. I think if you talk to many people who are putting in all their hours and taking on extra jobs, that doesn't chime very well with their experiences at all. And unfortunately, again, this is happening at a time when we have already lived through austerity, which has left people with very little bounce back, very little savings even, because wages have been so low, they've really, really stagnated. That whole project was supposed to reduce the debt. It didn't. In 2019, the debt was higher than it had ever been in peacetime. So, it's really not a great recipe. So something needs to be done, and I think with more empathy. When Nadine Zahawi was talking about, just all be careful with your electricity, again, that was the man that tried to claim £5,000 to heat his stables.
Yeah, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off in mid-sentence. Apologies for that, Gemma, but we are actually out of time, so we probably ought to wrap it up there. Lots of stories still to delve into another time, but I'm very pleased to say that you'll be back in the next hour and the hour after that. So I'll let you go and have a little rest, and I'll speak to you again a bit later.
Edward and Gemma,
for the moment, thank you. Do stay with us. Lots more to come here on Sky News Breakfast.